The city below glowed like a restless ocean of light, each flicker a reminder that life in Manhattan never paused, never slept, never forgave. From the top floor of Blake Tower, Liam Blake stood behind walls of glass that stretched floor to ceiling, his reflection sharp against the skyline. His dark suit fit him like armor, every line precise, every detail deliberate. The cufflinks that glinted under the dim light were white gold, discreet but undeniably powerful. In his hand, untouched, was a glass of whiskey that had long lost its warmth. He didn't drink it. He rarely did anymore. The ritual was enough. The image of a man who had everything was more important than whether he tasted any of it. Out there, horns blared, sirens cut through the night, laughter drifted up from the streets. But in the penthouse, silence reigned. It was a silence he had chosen, a silence he had earned. Success, as Liam had learned, demanded sacrifices. And in his case, the greatest sacrifice had been the part of himself that once believed in love. That part had died the night he saw Mia with Jacob Vance, his business rival, his enemy, her lipstick smudged, her smile shameless. He didn't lose just a lover that night. He lost faith in anything that wasn't a contract, a clause, or a deal signed in ink. Since then, Liam Blake had built his empire with cold precision. He had acquired skyscrapers, companies, entire city blocks. He had turned pain into profit, betrayal into leverage. To the world, he was a king, untouchable, invincible. But kings built their thrones on loneliness, and Liam knew it. Every night he stood in front of those glass walls, staring at the city that was his, and wondered why it never felt enough. A knock broke the silence. Julian, his assistant, opened the door just a fraction. "Mr. Blake," he said carefully. "Mr. Reed is waiting in the car. The gala begins in 30 minutes. Liam didn't answer right away. His gray eyes lingered on the skyline as though searching for a reason not to leave his sanctuary. "Why am I even going to this event?" he asked at last, his tone sharp but weary. "You donated $500,000 to the Atoria Foundation. They're honoring you tonight. Important for the shareholders. Good for the image," Julian replied smoothly. Image. The word Liam lived by. He set the whiskey down on the table, straightened his tie, and with one last look at the city, turned toward the elevator. The mirrored walls reflected him back with clinical accuracy. Hair in place, jaw sharp, eyes unreadable. He had perfected the look of a man untouchable, but lately the reflection felt like a mask too tight to breathe in. The car waited downstairs, sleek and black, the kind of vehicle that slipped through Manhattan's chaos like a blade. Inside, Logan Reed lounged with a glass of champagne, grinning as though the world was his private joke. Logan had been his friend since college, the only man alive who dared to tease him without consequence. "Finally," Logan said, raising his glass. "I thought you'd leave me to suffer through the vultures alone." "You love vultures," Liam replied, sliding into the seat. "I love chaos," Logan corrected. "And speaking of chaos, tonight I've got a game for you." Liam shot him a look. Logan's games were never harmless. "I'm not in the mood." "You will be," Logan said, his grin widening. "Because this one involves the rebel of the season, Olivia Hayes." The name meant nothing to Liam, but the spark in Logan's eyes made his chest tighten with something close to irritation. He knew that tone. He knew that grin. Whatever his old friend was planning, it wouldn't be simple. It never was. And as the car sped into the night, Liam Blake had the sudden, inexplicable sense that his carefully controlled world was about to crack, just enough for something dangerous to slip through, something that would test every wall he had built around his heart, something that would begin, as always, with a bet. The gala was a theater of wealth and whispers, chandeliers spilling light over polished marble floors, violins singing in the background while waiters drifted through with trays of wine that tasted more like status than flavor. Liam Blake moved through it with the ease of someone born for this world, every handshake firm, every smile measured, every gaze reminding others of his power. He didn't want to be there. Yet there he was, a symbol dressed in black, the untouchable king of skyscrapers. Logan Reed trailed beside him, eyes dancing with mischief as if the glittering hall was his personal stage. "There she is," Logan murmured, tilting his glass toward the far side of the ballroom. Liam followed the gesture and saw her. Olivia Hayes. She was everything the room despised and everything it secretly craved. While the other women glided like porcelain dolls, Olivia burned. Her black dress clung to her like defiance. Her hair tumbled loose, and her laughter, loud, unrestrained, shameless, cut through the music like broken glass. She raised her glass too quickly, spilled champagne across the silk, and instead of flinching, she laughed harder, snatching a napkin from a passing table without asking, blotting herself with a grace that mocked everyone watching. Around her, whispers swirled. Some called her a disgrace, others an untamed flame. Liam just stared, caught in a pull he did not understand. She was not beautiful in the curated way these people demanded. She was beautiful because she did not care. "Never heard of her," Liam said finally, his voice cold, though his eyes refused to leave her. "You've heard of her?" Logan chuckled. "You just don't care about gossip. Daughter of the late Senator Hayes, stepdaughter of Clarissa Hayes. She's been expelled from schools, sabotaged political dinners, and turned society into her playground. The papers call her a scandal." "I see. All her entertainment." "Why point her out to me?" Liam asked, suspicion already curling in his chest. "Because," Logan said, his grin sharpening, "I have a challenge. 3 months. Turn that wildfire into a woman fit for your world, a proper lady. Marry her, tame her, show the city that even chaos can wear the Blake name. I'll bet 2 million on it." The words hit like a slap, absurd yet daring. Liam's jaw tightened. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious when money is on the table," Logan replied. "It's not about love. It's not about forever. It's a deal. 3 months, then she walks away free. You'll have proven you can control even the uncontrollable, and I'll have my entertainment." For a moment, Liam wanted to laugh it off, to refuse, to shut down the madness. But when he looked again at Olivia, who at that very moment had kicked off her heels and was dancing barefoot to music no one else could hear, something stirred inside him. She moved like she belonged to no one, like the rules of the world bent around her and broke at her touch. And then, as though sensing the weight of his gaze, Olivia turned, her eyes, bold and unflinching, locked on his. She smiled. Not a polite smile, not an empty one. It was a challenge, a dare across the glittering hall, as if she knew exactly what kind of man he was and exactly what kind of war he had just been invited into. Logan leaned closer, his voice smooth with triumph. "So, Blake, are you in or are you afraid?" Liam didn't answer. Not yet. But the city that never forgave had just witnessed the first spark of something neither of them could control. The night after the gala weighed heavy on Olivia Hayes, like an echo of every judgmental stare she had endured. The headlines were already cruel by morning. Photos of her barefoot on the ballroom floor painted her as reckless, unworthy, a scandal that refused to die. Clarissa Hayes, her stepmother, stormed into her room with clipped words and sharper threats. Olivia sat at her vanity, brushing her tangled hair, pretending not to hear. Pretending not to care was easier than admitting how deep the words cut. But when she walked downstairs for breakfast, something unusual awaited her. A man in an immaculate suit sat waiting in her living room, posture straight as a blade. Julian, Liam Blake's personal assistant. He rose politely, eyes calm but unreadable. "Miss Hayes?" he said, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "Mr. Blake requests your presence for a private lunch. He has a proposal that may interest you." Olivia's first instinct was to laugh in his face. Liam Blake, the skyscraper king, wanted something from her. That was absurd, but then again, absurdity was her currency. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "And if I say no?" she asked. Julian gave a faint smile. "Then Mr. Blake will be disappointed, and you'll never know what freedom he is offering." Freedom. The word hit her like a spark in a room filled with gasoline. Clarissa's constant pressure to marry a politician twice her age was suffocating. The walls of her life were closing in. Maybe this was a door, even if it led straight into fire. By noon, she arrived at the Blake Tower restaurant in a scarlet-red dress that caught every eye. She walked in like a storm, heels clicking, chin lifted in defiance. Liam was already waiting at a corner table with a view of the city stretched beneath them. He stood as she approached, composed, untouchable, as though even the air bowed to his command. "So you aunt to turn me into a princess," Olivia said as she sat down, her smile sharp as glass. "Not a princess," Liam replied evenly. "A woman who owns her name. A woman who cannot be controlled by gossip or by her stepmother. I want to propose a marriage of convenience. 3 months. A contract. No feelings, no obligations beyond the public eye." Olivia arched a brow, pretending to be amused, though her pulse quickened. "Marriage," she repeated slowly, tasting the word like poison. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said, leaning forward slightly. "You want freedom. I want to win a game I never should have agreed to, but I did. Our arrangement benefits us both." The silence between them thickened, the weight of his eyes pressing into her as though he could strip her rebellion bare. Olivia held his gaze, unwilling to let him win the staring war. "And after 3 months?" she asked. "We part ways," Liam answered. "Clean, no scandals, no strings. You walk away with your independence. I walk away with victory." Olivia laughed then, a sound that was almost sad. "You're worse than the rumors say." But then she leaned forward, extended her hand across the table, and met his with a firm grip. "Fine, I'll play your game. But one condition. No stepping into my bedroom. No seduction. No false promises of love." "I've never made promises I couldn't keep," Liam replied coldly, shaking her hand. Their eyes locked in silent challenge. Neither flinched, neither smiled. Yet in that moment, something deeper than a contract was signed, something neither of them understood. The deal had been struck, but what neither Liam nor Olivia could predict was how quickly lines between game and truth would blur. The marriage was no longer an idea. It was a storm already gathering on the horizon. The Waldorf Astoria glittered under a sky thick with cameras and flashing lights. The city's elite arrived draped in silk and diamonds, whispering theories as they entered the marble hall transformed into a cathedral of flowers and crystal. No one could understand how it had come to this so suddenly. Liam Blake, the untouchable billionaire who never let anyone close, marrying Olivia Hayes, the rebellious heiress who mocked the very world she now walked into. It was scandal and spectacle bound together, and every guest came hungry for blood, not romance. Olivia's steps echoed against the marble aisle as she entered, her gown a river of pure silk, simple but cut with such precision it silenced even the sharpest tongues. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders, her chin lifted as if daring anyone to call her unworthy. But behind her defiance, her heart thudded in her chest like a drum. She had agreed to this madness, yes, but now, surrounded by stares that wanted her to fail, the weight of it pressed against her bones. At the altar, Liam stood waiting, his black suit sculpted to perfection, his expression carved from stone. He didn't fidget. He didn't waver. If the world expected love in his eyes, it found only control. Yet as Olivia drew closer, for a brief second he felt something stir, something dangerous, something he had long buried. The officiant's words carried through the hall, a blend of tradition and irony. "Do you, Olivia Hayes, take Liam Blake to be your lawful husband, as agreed upon by the terms of your union?" Olivia held Liam's eyes, her lips curling in the faintest hint of mockery. "I do," she said, her voice steady, even though her pulse was racing. "And do you, Liam Blake, take Olivia Hayes to be your lawful wife, committing to this union as per the contract you have signed?" Liam's jaw tightened. "I do." There was no kiss, only the cold slide of Ray and Ang's exchanged like signatures on a deal. Applause scattered politely, cameras clicked furiously, but the air remained heavy with disbelief. The wedding was not a fairy tale. It was a transaction dressed in white. That night, the world buzzed with headlines. From scandal to the altar, the rebel tamed, the billionaire's reckless choice. Clarissa Hayes, fuming behind her painted smile, could do nothing but watch as her stepdaughter slipped beyond her control. Olivia had played her move, and Liam had become her shield, whether willingly or not. But the true revelation came not under the eyes of flashing cameras, but in the quiet of the bridal suite. Olivia sat at the edge of the bed, pulling the pins from her hair, her gown pooled around her like moonlight. Liam, loosening his tie, prepared for another night of silence and distance. Then her voice cut through the stillness. "I want to tell you something," she said, her tone calm but laced with something raw. He looked up, expecting another barb, another joke at his expense. "I know what you think of me," she continued. "I know the names, the stories, the scandals, but they're all wrong. I've never given myself to anyone. I've never been touched. I'm a virgin, Liam." The words struck like lightning, shattering the careful image he had built of her. He froze, staring at her as if she had spoken in another language. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice lower than usual, cautious. "I mean that everything you assumed when you agreed to this deal," she said, lifting her chin though her eyes shimmered with something close to vulnerability, "is a lie. I'm not the woman they say I am, and now you've married someone you don't even know." For the first time in years, Liam Blake had no response. No retort. No calculation. The cold walls of certainty he had built around himself began to fracture, because what sat before him was as not a scandal, not a problem to solve, not a bet to win. It was a truth so disarming it unsettled the very core of the man who thought he could never be surprised again. And as the silence stretched between them, it became clear that this marriage was no longer the neat game he believed he could control. It was a storm far greater than either of them imagined, and it had only just begun. Blake Manor loomed over the Hudson River like a fortress built to keep feelings out. Its marble columns and sweeping staircases whispered of wealth and tradition, but behind the grandeur there was a silence so thick it pressed against the walls. When Olivia first stepped through the wrought iron gates as Mrs. Blake, she felt less like a bride and more like a guest entering a gilded prison. Every detail was perfect, every corner polished, but perfection carried no warmth. The staff moved like shadows, precise and disciplined, eyes lowered as though emotions were forbidden here. They addressed her with respect, but it was the kind of respect that came without humanity, rehearsed and hollow. At breakfast the next morning, she sat across the massive oak table from Liam. The space between them stretched wide, filled with porcelain plates, crystal glasses, and fruits cut to mathematical perfection. He didn't look at her when he asked if she slept well. She didn't look at him when she answered. The silence afterward was louder than any argument. Olivia wandered the manor that day, heels clicking against marble floors, eyes drifting across portraits of Blakes from generations past, men who looked as though they carried the same cold in their veins as Liam. She felt the house watching her, waiting to see if she would break under its weight. By the afternoon, restless and suffocated, she found herself in a forgotten corridor, an ivy-covered archway half hidden by shadows. Curious, she pushed through and discovered what the manor itself seemed to have abandoned. A garden. It wasn't manicured like the rest of the estate. It was wild, breathing, lavender and jasmine. Knee spilled across stone paths. A fountain murmured quietly in the center, and benches of worn stone waited patiently for someone to sit. Olivia exhaled for the first time since she arrived. Here, finally, the air didn't feel scripted. She returned the next day, and the day after that, sometimes with a book, sometimes only with her thoughts. It became her secret refuge, a place where she could exist without being trapped by marble or judgment. But Olivia was not only hiding. Away from the gossip and cameras, she began to act in ways no one expected of the so-called rebel heiress. She discovered that Mrs. Ellen, the housekeeper, had a daughter undergoing cancer treatment. Without a word, Olivia arranged for financial help through Julian, never revealing her name. She visited an orphanage in Yonkers where her childhood nanny had grown up, donating in silence. At night, she left the manor with blankets and food baskets, giving them directly to those who lived unseen on city corners. These weren't performances. They were quiet acts of rebellion against the version of herself the world believed in. Liam noticed. He didn't confront her at first, only observed from the shadows of the halls and from the way the staff seemed lighter when she was near. He had built this house as a monument to control, yet she was planting something inside it that he couldn't contain. One evening, as she carried a tray of tea toward the garden, his voice stopped her at the door. "You've been going out there often?" She froze, the tray trembling slightly in her hands. "It's the only place in this house that breathes," she replied carefully, expecting his disapproval. Liam stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled. He held a glass of wine, but his eyes were fixed on her, sharper than usual, though not unkind. "I thought you'd get bored here, and I thought you'd ignore me." "Completely," she said, her lips curving in a half-smile. He gave a quiet laugh, a sound so rare it startled her. "I tried," he admitted, and the silence that followed carried more weight than 100 words. For the first time, Olivia saw not the ruthless king of steel and contracts, but a man who seemed almost human, almost vulnerable. A man who, like her, had been locked in his own prison. And she realized then that the mansion's silence wasn't empty at all. It was waiting, just like him, to be broken. Neither of them knew it yet, but the cracks in the walls they had built were already forming. And from those cracks, something dangerous and fragile was beginning to grow. The rain tapped lightly against the tall windows of Blake Manor the night everything began to shift. Dinner had started like every other, with Liam at one end of the long oak table and Olivia at the other, silence filling the space between them like a third guest. But tonight Liam set aside his phone, folded the newspaper closed, and looked across at her. For the first time, there was no shield of distraction. Olivia raised her eyes, cautious. "You're actually here tonight," she said, her voice playful but edged with curiosity. "I was always here," he replied, his tone softer than usual. "Just not present." The words lingered, heavy, and something in her chest softened. They ate slowly, speaking of books she had found in the manor's library, of the small garden she claimed as her sanctuary, of the world outside the gates that both of them avoided for different reasons. It was the first time the silence between them didn't feel like a weapon. After dinner, Liam suggested they take coffee in the smaller dining room, a place he rarely used. The atmosphere there was warmer, the distance between them shorter. Olivia told him about her mother, about how life had been before Clarissa turned her grief into chains. Her voice wavered only once, when she admitted that she had used rebellion as a shield because it was easier to be hated than invisible. Liam listened without interrupting, his eyes steady on her, and when she finished, he spoke for the first time about Mia, how he had believed in building a future together, only to watch her betray him for ambition. "It wasn't her leaving that destroyed me," he confessed quietly. "It was the realization that love can be nothing more than a transaction. Since then, I turned every feeling into a clause, every promise into a contract. It was the only way to stay in control." Olivia gave a sad smile. "So, here we are, two survivors of wars no one ever saw." The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was charged, alive, trembling with something both of them feared to name. Later that night, unable to sleep, Olivia wandered into the library. The fire crackled, casting soft light over shelves of unread books. Liam was there, seated in a leather armchair, a book resting in his hands, reading glasses perched on his nose. The sight of him caught her off guard. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man searching for something he had forgotten. "I didn't know you read romances," she teased lightly. "This one is about war," he replied, closing the book gently. "But even wars have poetry hidden between the battles." She walked closer, her bare feet whispering against the carpet. "I can't sleep either," she admitted. "The quieter it gets, the louder my mind becomes." "What keeps you awake?" he asked, his tone calm but carrying genuine curiosity. Olivia stared at the flames. "Growing up hearing I was a mistake, that my behavior was an embarrassment, that I needed to be controlled. but no one ever told me how to live with the pain, so I screamed with my actions. At least then someone saw me, even if it was just to hate me. Liam set the book aside. He didn't rush to fill the silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "You're not a mistake. You're someone who has been searching for a place to exist." Her throat tightened, her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Instead, she asked, "And you? Why build this castle just to live in it alone?" He hesitated, but the gentleness in her gaze made it impossible to hide. "Because I loved someone who turned my heart into a bargaining chip. I thought control would protect me, but control is just another kind of prison." The firelight danced across his face as his next words slipped out before he could stop them. "And since you arrived, Olivia, you've been undoing everything I thought was safe." She froze, the confession hanging between them like a fragile glass about to shatter. Slowly she stepped closer, until the space between them was barely a breath. His hand lifted almost against his will, his fingers brushing against her cheek with a tenderness that shocked them both. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered, as if the admission cost him something. "Then don't," she murmured, her voice trembling but steady. "Just stay." And for the first time since the night their contract bound them, Liam Blake stayed, not as a businessman, not as a man of control, but as a human being stripped bare. In the flickering light of the library fire, two wounded souls dared to stop running, if only for one night. Neither of them spoke of love, but the silence between them was full of it. And neither of them knew that outside the walls of Blake Manor, forces were already moving, determined to break apart what had just begun to heal. The warmth that had begun to take root between Liam and Olivia did not go unnoticed. Shadows watched their every move, whispers carried through corridors of power, and envy stirred like smoke behind closed doors. For the first time in years, Liam allowed someone into his fortress, and for the first time in her life, Olivia felt seen without judgment. But peace never lasts long in a world built on greed and Conti's. Roll. It started with an envelope delivered to Blake Manor without a return address. Olivia found it on the entry table one morning, her name written in neat, deliberate script. Inside were photographs. Clear images of Liam sitting across from Mia Kingsley at an elegant restaurant in the city. The date stamped on the bottom corner was just last week. In the photos, Liam's expression was calm, almost comfortable. Mia's lips were curved in a smile that reeked of victory. Olivia's chest tightened. Her breath grew shallow. She wanted to believe there was some explanation, but the old voice in her head, the one that had whispered she was never enough, rose again like a ghost. Her fingers trembled as she shoved the pictures back into the envelope and hid it away. When Liam came home that night, she forced a smile, said she was tired, and shut herself in her room. He noticed the distance but assumed it was exhaustion. He had no idea the storm already forming in her heart. At the same time, the empire he had built, brick by brick, began to shake. Investors who had once trusted him started pulling their money, murmurs of instability spreading like poison. The stock dipped, meetings stretched into endless hours, rumors hinted at a leak, someone feeding confidential information to competitors. Liam pushed harder, working sleepless nights to keep Blake Properties from collapse, never realizing Mia was behind it all. She had orchestrated the photos, edited recordings of their meeting, and fed them into the ears of the right people. To the outside world, it appeared Liam was rekindling an old partnership with a woman whose reputation was toxic. And Olivia, who should have been the one person to stand by him, now questioned everything. At dinner, she grew quiet, her laughter gone. She avoided his eyes, speaking in polite phrases that sliced deeper than silence. Each time he reached, across the distance, she pulled further away. One night she slipped into the garden alone, sitting on the cold stone bench with tears stinging her cheeks. The photographs replayed in her mind, each one a dagger. "I should have known," she whispered into the night. "I should have known I was just a bet." Inside the manor, Liam stared at empty hallways, the weight of betrayal pressing from every direction. He thought he had been cautious with Mia, that their brief meeting was harmless, but he didn't realize how easily she could twist appearances into weapons. While he fought to hold his empire together, the one thing he feared most was slipping through his fingers: Olivia's trust. And somewhere far from Blake Manor, Mia Kingsley raised a glass of wine in triumph. She had cracked the first fault line in their fragile bond. Clarissa Hayes, Olivia's stepmother, fanned the flames with daily calls dripping with venom. "You're forgetting who you are, Olivia," she sneered. "He's playing you like a pawn. Don't be foolish." Olivia pressed the phone to her ear, her jaw tight. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence itself betrayed her doubt. The game that began as a wager was no longer harmless. It had become a battlefield of secrets and half-truths, and in the middle of it stood two hearts, already scarred, too fragile for lies, yet too proud to ask for the truth. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was only the beginning. The storm gathering outside the walls of Blake Manor was about to strike, and when it did, it would shatter everything they thought they knew about each other. The weight of doubt pressed harder on Olivia's chest with every passing day. The photographs of Liam with Mia haunted her like ghosts she couldn't banish. His late nights, the endless phone calls, the constant meetings, every detail became proof in her mind that she had been a fool to believe even for a moment that she mattered to him. And she moved through Blake Manor with a smile painted on her lips, but her heart was retreating into the same lonely silence she had known all her life. Then one morning, at a cafe far from the manor, Olivia overheard two men in suits whispering over their coffee. She wasn't listening at first, but Liam's name caught her attention. "If the funds don't come through by Friday, 600 employees are gone," one man muttered. "I heard he even put his personal properties on the line," the other said. "He's holding the company up with his own hands. And all that talk about his ex? Manipulated. He's fighting a war no one sees." Olivia froze. The world tilted around her. Her throat went dry as the truth bled through their words. Liam wasn't betraying her. He was drowning, fighting to save his company, his people, everything he had built. And she had doubted him. She had believed shadows instead of him. Guilt burned through her. She remembered the old account her mother had left her, money Clarissa could never touch. It was her secret, her plan for escape. But now escape was the last thing on her mind. Without hesitation, she went to her lawyer, signed the transfer, and moved millions into Liam's company under a single instruction: keep it anonymous. She signed only O. Hayes. He would never know. He would never owe her. It was not for recognition. It was because, despite her anger, despite her doubts, she still loved him. That night she returned to the manor exhausted, her chest lighter for the first time in weeks. But fate has a way of punishing hearts that dare to hope. The following evening, after delivering supplies at a homeless shelter in the Bronx, Olivia crossed the street with a bag of food in her arms. She never saw the truck. It roared from the corner at impossible speed, headlights blinding, horns silent. The impact threw her to the ground, the food scatty, ring like broken promises. Screams filled the night as the truck sped away, disappearing into the dark. By the time Liam received the call, his world collapsed. He left a meeting mid-sentence, sprinting through the corridors of his own empire without a care for the eyes that followed. At the hospital, he found her broken and unconscious, machines breathing for her, tubes and wires wrapped around her fragile body like chains. His knees nearly gave out at the sight. Hours later, when his accountant brought him a folder of financial updates, Liam saw the truth he hadn't expected. A massive anonymous transfer had saved Blake Properties. The signature at the bottom read, O. Hayes, and next to it, in her handwriting, a note scrawled to the bank. Make this discreet. He doesn't need to know it was me. The paper trembled in his hands. His chest tightened until he couldn't breathe. She had saved him. Even believing he had betrayed her, she had saved him. And now she lay between life and death because of a world that punished her for loving. Liam sat beside her hospital bed, his hand gripping hers as though his strength alone could anchor her spirit to the earth. I didn't know, he whispered, voice breaking. I should have protected you. I should have seen. Please, Olivia, don't leave me now. Not when I finally understand what you mean to me. The monitors beeped steadily, her chest rising and falling with borrowed breath. But for Liam Blake, the cold king of skyscrapers, time had stopped. He had fought to control everything in his life, but here, at her bedside, he realized the most important thing in his world was something he could not command. It was her heart. And for the first time, he prayed, not for victory, not for power, but for one more chance to tell her he loved her before it was too late. The hospital corridors had their own kind of silence, one that was heavier than Blake Manor ever carried. Machines hummed, monitors beeped steadily, but the weight of the airways, suffocating. Liam hadn't left Olivia's side since the accident. His once immaculate suits now carried the wrinkles of sleepless nights, his tie forgotten, his eyes bloodshot from the war he was fighting in silence. He gripped her hand every hour as though afraid she would slip away if he let go for even a breath. He replayed everything he had discovered, the photographs planted by Mia, the edited recordings, the sudden collapse of investor trust. Every thread, when pulled, led back to one name: Mia Kingsley. The woman he once trusted had not only broken his heart years ago, but now had nearly destroyed the one person who had managed to rebuild it. On the third night, he found the note attached to the transfer documents. Please make this discreet. Mr. Blake cannot know it was me. I never needed thanks. I only wanted him to remain the man I admired in silence. Olivia's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable, stared back at him. Liam read the lines over and over until his chest burned. Even when she believed he had betrayed her, even when her pride should have told her to walk away, she had given everything to save him. He leaned over her bed, forehead pressed to her hand. I don't deserve you, he whispered. But if you wake up, I swear I will spend the rest of my life proving that I see you. Not the scandal, not the rebel, just you. On the sixth day, a flicker of movement. Her fingers twitched beneath his, then her eyelids quivered. Nurses rushed in, voices raised in disbelief. Liam's heart slammed against his ribs as her eyes finally opened, dazed and unfocused, but alive. Where am I? She breathed weakly. You're safe, Liam said, voice breaking as tears burned his eyes. You're with me. Her gaze softened when she recognized him, and though she was weak, she smiled faintly. You stayed. I'm not leaving again, he promised, his voice rough, but the battle, woe, hasn't over. Behind the fragile joy of her awakening, Liam was already moving pieces. With Julian's help, a private investigator traced the truck, the payments, the phone records. The evidence built a chain too precise to deny. It all circled back to Mia. She hadn't just tried to ruin his company. She had tried to take Olivia's life. The night the police moved in, Mia was found in the Bahamas, lounging poolside as though she had won. When the cuffs clicked around her wrists, the mask of control cracked, but only for a second. News of her arrest spread across the world in hours. Olivia Hayes, once painted as the reckless heiress, became the woman who survived betrayal, manipulation, and a murder attempt. The narrative shifted, and compassion bloomed where ridicule once lived. At the hospital, Olivia watched the story unfold on television. She clutched the remote tightly, her knuckles white. It was her, wasn't it? She whispered. Liam sat on the edge of her bed, his eyes steady. Yes, but this isn't your fault. She destroyed what was left of her soul long before you entered my life. Olivia's voice cracked. I blamed myself for not trusting you, for letting those photographs blind me, for shutting you out when you were already drowning. He reached for her hand, his grip firm and certain. And I blamed myself for not protecting you. But we can't live in the shadows of what we failed. We only move forward if we forgive. Their eyes locked. In that moment, no words of love were needed, because forgiveness itself was love. Silent, raw, and powerful. Liam bent and pressed his lips to her forehead, the simplest vow he could make. He would not run, he would not hide, and he would never again allow fear to speak louder than his heart. Outside her hospital window, the city glittered as always, but for Liam and Olivia, everything had changed. The storm had broken. What remained was fragile, but it was real. And for the first time, they both understood that their story was not about contracts or wagers or control. It was about surviving the wreck, age, and still choosing each other when the smoke cleared. The weeks that followed were slow and heavy, each day measured by the steady rhythm of Olivia's recovery. At first, she could barely stand, her legs trembling as though they belonged to someone else. Liam was always there, his hand steady beneath her arm, never rushing her, never allowing her to fall. The world outside called him back to meetings and headlines, but he ignored them. For the first time, the empire could wait. The woman who had given him everything without asking for anything in return was the only empire that mattered. Blake Manor changed with her return. The windows that had once remained shuttered now stood open, letting the scent of lavender drift through the halls. The staff who had once moved like shadows now carried smiles, their loyalty quietly shifting from duty to affection. Olivia breathed life into the house with laughter and small rebellions, even if she still walked with a cane. Liam often watched her from the balcony in the mornings, barefoot in the garden, sunlight warming her hair, and each time he felt the same truth press against his chest. He didn't just want her near, he wanted her forever. But forever could not be built on silence. One evening, as twilight painted the river in shades of fire, Liam led her to the very bench in the garden where she used to sit alone. He carried no documents, no contracts, nothing that could bind except the weight of his own heart. Olivia looked at him curiously as he knelt, not with arrogance but with humility, his voice rawer than she had ever heard it. "When I asked you to marry me the first time, it was for a bet, for pride, for control. I didn't deserve your yes, and I didn't deserve your trust. But you stayed. Even when you believed I had betrayed you, you saved me. And when I almost lost you, I understood the truth I had been running from. I love you, Olivia. Not as a game, not as a contract. I love you because you tore down walls I thought would never break. So now I am asking you again, not as a businessman, not as a king of steel and glass, but as a man who finally understands what his heart is for. Will you be my wife for real?" Tears blurred her eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of the moment she never thought she would see. She lowered herself onto the ground beside him, her hand on his cheek. "I stayed because my heart had already chosen you, even when I wanted to hate you. I don't want freedom from you, Liam. I want freedom with you. And yes, I will be your wife. For real. For always." The wedding that followed was nothing like the spectacle that had come before. No flashing cameras, no society vultures waiting for failure. Instead, the ceremony was held in the garden of Blake Manor, beneath an arch of white roses and lavender Olivia had planted herself. The staff stood as family, true friends gathered close, and for the first time Liam felt no need to perform. When he spoke his vows, his voice did not echo with control, but with surrender. "I promise to choose you even on the days when life feels impossible. I promise never to treat your flaws as weapons, never to forget that you saved me before I even knew I needed saving." Olivia's voice trembled, but her words were steady. "I promise to see you as a man, not as a title. To love you not because you are strong, but because you were brave enough to be broken in front of me. And I promise to stay because love is not about leaving when it hurt. It is about holding on until it heals." Their kiss was soft, unhurried, and when the applause rose around them, it was not the hollow sound of duty, but the genuine warmth of witnesses to something true. As night fell, they danced barefoot in the garden under a sky lit with stars. There was no music but the hum of the river and the rhythm of their hearts. For the first time in years, Liam's chest felt light, free of chains, free of fear. And Olivia, resting her head against his shoulder, knew she was no longer the scandalous rebel, no longer the pawn in her stepmother's schemes. She was simply a woman who had chosen love and been chosen in return. The world would always gossip, it would always hunger for scandal. But for them, it no longer mattered. Because the story was not about a millionaire who won a bet or a rebellious girl forced into a role she never wanted. It was about two wounded souls who collided in the wreckage of broken promises and built something no one believed possible. And in the quiet of their garden, with stars as their only witnesses, Liam and Olivia finally understood. True love is not born in perfection. It is born in the ruins, when two people look at each other's scars and decide to stay.